to report the Sunday Roundup, coming to you by telephone, not Skype this evening because apparently we're having all kinds of technical problems. And but I'm joined tonight. You heard the clip with Cenk Uygur interviewing Mark Feldstein about what they had planned for Jack Anderson back in the Nixon administration, and Cenk Uygur thought he said that's unbelievable, that's crazy. But you know, Cenk Uygur wouldn't know his own history if it had been on the rear end, and such is the way with journalists in this town. But I'm joined tonight by two preeminent folks who have been in journalism for a number of years. Andrew Craig, who is the head of the Justice Integrity Project, formerly a reporter with the Hartford Courant, the oldest newspaper in North America, and John Edward Hurley, the head of the McClendon Group that meets at the National Press Club every week with noted speakers. Gentlemen, are you with us? Even though we're having technical problems, can you hear me?
I certainly can. Count me in on it. I can hear you okay.
Okay, well, thanks for joining us tonight. And let me just, as a way of introduction, mention that Andrew Craig has been doing a lot of work with the Justice Integrity Project on some of the more seamier side of the way the Justice Department and the courts work. And, of course, John Edward Hurley also has some experience with the way the courts operate in this town. But, Andrew, why don't you give us a thumbnail sketch of some of the things that you've discovered? You're also a lawyer, and you've seen this from both sides, the journalist and the lawyer, but just how this town operates, because I don't think people outside the Beltway really have, in some cases, an appreciation for the malfeasance and chicanery that goes on here.
Well, it's very hard to know because, Wayne, because there's vast organizational efforts to give people a hint of the news and make people think that they're getting the whole meal when it's really just the flotsam on top of the wave. And our project is to look at some complex, mostly federal prosecutions of very complicated cases with a lot of implications for the public, and use the background of 3 or 4 decades of law and journalism to really see what's going on, because the prosecution has tremendous tools of announcing indictments, leaking information, and basically bludgeoning 95% of people into guilty pleas. And the fact is that most of the people have done something wrong, just like most people in the public. If you look hard enough, there's something that people did wrong. But the system is fundamentally out of whack. And here's, I'll just end on what we're doing at this Justice Integrity Project is saying, well, what are the implications for the public? And even if you don't care about crime and certainly accused political leaders, there's a tremendous possibility to affect the entire agenda of the environment, war and peace, elections, the budget crisis, healthcare, education, everything, if you're able to unfairly target people from one side or another, because these are the people that implement these policies.
And why don't you give the listeners the website so they can go visit it and see what some of these cases that you've been working on are all about?
Well, it's justice-integrity.org, and we had a very busy week last week with a number of stories about Alabama, New Jersey, and elsewhere. And we're a nonpartisan group, and we've looked at people like Don Siegelman in Alabama, Bernard Carrick, the former police commissioner in New York, and found very, very serious problems with their prosecution.
Okay, well, why don't we open this up into a forum? As I mentioned to listeners, we can do something like what they do with the McLaughlin Group. We've had this budget agreement. We almost had a shutdown, but it looks like President Obama has really conceded a lot that's going to affect people who could, I guess, be described as the people who were his base. They're going to lose a lot of government programs. They're going to lose a lot of government funding. And these, of course, are the people at the lower end of the economic spectrum. And John, you were mentioning earlier this week that you thought that there was like a lot of posturing, but they would come to an agreement in the end. And apparently they did that late Friday night. But you've seen this happen in Washington before with Gingrich and Clinton, and how the Congress and the White House do this sort of dance, but it's almost a done deal, isn't it, behind the scenes?
Oh yes, I mean, people that have been. I've been around here since I was born in Georgetown, so plus my family's been around for generations in Washington, so we're pretty used to all different variations on smoke and mirrors, and this latest one, of course, then they're doing a lot of detail work next week on it, you see, and then of course they'll move. A lot of these things aren't resolved anyway. I mean, they're resolved to they've sort of set the parameters, shall we say, along the lines that you stated, and that is that, they don't really have much concern for people in any part of the spectrum, actually, as far as forking over more a sacrifice, and other than the middle and lower end of the spectrum are the ones that need more sacrifice according to the way these people are working it out, and that they've changed the plane of discussion to that. And then they will discuss it further next week before they vote on it at the end of next week. Then they'll come up with the whole new budget for the next year. But they've set the parameters of discussion now.
Right, and of course this is a continuing resolution they've agreed to, and they're going to try to hammer out the final budget, I guess, in the next week or so. But we're probably going to see a lot of these programs that the Republicans want cut. They're going to try to make a run for those. It's just now, Andy, you and I were in a conversation last year with an individual. We won't mention who he was, but somebody who was pretty well connected to the Obama White House predicted that this would be he predicted what was going to happen at the states, with the states going basically bankrupt and cutting programs. We've seen what's happening in Wisconsin and Ohio and in Florida and some other states with these governors just slashing and burning these programs. But it was very prescient what that individual had to say, wasn't it?
Well, it was, and I think without unduly identifying the person, we can say it was a long-time, high-up Democratic former official and operative who was extremely disappointed with Obama and just felt that there was going to be one sellout after another. He wasn't, I don't believe, a particularly radical person. He was just someone who, on the basis of what he had seen, pulled out his crystal ball for us and said, "This guy's going to sell out his base." There's a couple of very quick points I'd like to make about this hokum that we saw. If people were serious about balancing the budget, there's a couple of points that are almost entirely unaddressed. One is, what about the income side, the government's income side? So Obama took it off the table, basically raising taxes on anybody, even rich people, even though We used to have, during times of great prosperity, when the wealth of this country was built up, we had 70 and 90% marginal tax rates. And there's no talk about that. In fact, Obama just caved in on that last fall, or more closer to the winter. A second thing is, there's people are taking all of the wars and all of that huge national security part completely off the table. And again,
right.
A serious look at balancing the budget would include that. And the last 2 points is Keynesian economics. They make it sound like Darwinism, some controversial theory, but Roosevelt went through this trying to balance the budget in 1937, and it restarted the Depression. Because if you start firing hundreds of thousands of people at the state and local level, you're going to have a big problem. I mean,
right.
there aren't that many reputable economists, I suppose you can find some, who think that firing massive amounts of people helps balance the budget. I mean, we went through that. And finally, I don't quite get it. I am a lawyer, but I don't quite get how you can say we have to shut down the government at midnight Friday, and then because a couple of leaders announce a deal that hasn't been voted on, you say, oh, we don't have to shut it down.
Right.
I mean, I may be missing something on the last point. I feel pretty confident about the first three, but what am I missing? Where did Congress vote on this so that we don't have a shutdown?
Absolutely. And John, you and I often drive by the Federal Reserve Bank, and I noted that they would not have been affected by the shutdown because they get their funding, of course, from other sources, primarily the banks. And I think this goes to show that so many of these decisions, as Andy said, they're made. Not even by members of Congress. There's select members of Congress, and then the Federal Reserve and the Treasury, and we're not party to any of these discussions. And I see it. It's worse now than I even think it has been in the past. And John, you've been around here a long time, and wouldn't you say that it's more is done in secret now than we've ever seen?
Oh, definitely. If you notice the bad theater about one side marching out and everybody, the bank of microphones, and then the other side marching out, then they're sending out a notice to the, we're having a press conference here, and then they check with the other side's having a scheduled press conference within 45 minutes, be there for that hoodoo, It's getting to be bad theater,
Well, you almost think that they should bring in the referees from the World Wrestling Federation to, I mean, it's scripted drama.
And then we have this odd situation with the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, breaking out into tears almost over anything. I mean, I have a feeling this guy probably starts crying at the end of an episode of Lassie. The guy, he seems to be sort of unbalanced, I guess the sad thing is he's second in line to the presidency, which should make us all rather fearful. We've got him, and we can, we've got a lot of, but I've said this many times to both of you. In the past, we had characters. I almost could call them statesmen in Congress. Of course, they were characters, but they actually were able to get a lot of these things done without all the melodramatic interludes as we see today with what seems to be these members now are almost neophytes compared to people we've seen in the past, like, John McClellan and Sam Rayburn, and although they weren't maybe the best people in the world, they managed to get things done one way or another. And maybe it's like they always said, if you don't like if you like sausage, don't see how it's made. And the same thing with politics here. But now we're seeing just these sort of like I would call them almost amateurish compared to people we've had in the past who used to make this government operate.
Well, you had people like Speaker McCormick, and they weren't always playing to the media on what they were doing either, you know.
Right.
Let me address the question of tears and say that for those of us with long memories, Edmund Muskie, who was a pretty serious candidate for president, was basically driven from the race. I think it was in '72 when, during a snowstorm, there was an attack on his wife, a kind of vicious verbal attack by the newspaper editor, publisher up there, William Loeb, and he was accused of having tears in his eyes, and
right.
It was considered such an incredible blow to his leadership potential that he quickly left the race. There was great hue and cry that he had tears.
Absolutely.
And it was only later that, some people looked back and said, well, maybe it was just the snow melting on his cheek, I mean, but it was a huge deal. It was made into something special, and here it doesn't matter. So it's kind of an uneven playing field where some people do something and it's a national disgrace, and somebody else does exactly the same thing, and who cares, except here on the show where you have no holds barred.
Right, and we had Tom Eagleton forced off the ticket with McGovern that same year in '72 because he was in private seeking treatment for his depression. And here we have Boehner, who's clearly showing he's got some emotional difficulties in public, and there's no hue and cry, as we saw, that was directed against Tom Eagleton. But hold on, and we will be right back with our two guests right after this short break. This is Wayne Madsen from Washington.